Welcome to our webinar. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful Wednesday. We have Roland Chiwetelou with us today from Eckler, and Roland's going to talk to us about financial resiliency during challenging times, which if you've been following the economic news lately, it's a very topical webinar and one that hopefully you will get some very practical suggestions on things that you can take home and do within your own family. Just to help you make those dollars go further. So without further ado, I will turn over to Roland. I know there will be an opportunity at the end for questions. So we will try to make this as interactive as possible. Thank you, Roland. Over to you.
OASIS selected Eckler to collaborate on providing the support to OASIS members. Eckler is independent from OASIS. We do work with OASIS in terms of being a consultant, consulting on the plan. And we work with other organizations in a similar facet. My position at Eckler is I'm the financial wellness consultant. So I do this type of work all the time with members and employee groups across the country, where we are discussing, financial topics that will hope to reduce levels of financial stress and improve financial well-being. So this is the type of work that I've been doing well over a decade now. And prior to that, I was a practicing financial planner. So I'm coming up on 20 years in total in the financial planning and retirement planning space. We have experienced and gone through a lot, not just in the last 12 to 18 months with increased interest rates and inflation, but if you want to go back to COVID, it's really been 4 years plus now of turbulent times. And so it's no wonder that when you look at surveys that try to gauge the levels of financial stress that people are carrying, we're seeing record high levels of financial stress. And so as Karen mentioned, we want to take this opportunity to provide some relevant information that can hopefully allow you to be a little bit more resilient to the different stressors that are out there that you might be feeling. So we want to talk about it in terms of these particular topics. Thinking about how to possibly increase your earnings if possible. Obviously, spending less is one of the tools in your toolbox, but of course, it's difficult given the fact that living expenses have increased significantly. So we'll talk about ways to find opportunities to trim expenses, even though you're seeing your overall living costs go up. And as interest rates have gone up, that has a severe impact on anyone who's carrying a lot of debt. And so we do want to spend, I think probably a good portion of today talking about how to manage debt, but especially with mortgages. And so you may have a mortgage coming up for renewal, and wondering sort of what to do, what your options are to sort of navigate the next little bit of time that you have until your mortgage comes up for renewal. And then also how to deal with that whole renewal process, given what's going on with higher rates. If you can maintain your savings, even with all the other challenges we just talked about. So we want to talk about why that might be important to still try to maintain your levels of savings if you can. And then certainly with your long-term investments, what are the things to think about as, the economic picture has changed. And certainly if you're looking at your investment performance recently, there's a lot of volatility. So we'll talk about that as well. And then finally, what resources are available to help you and your household fight all the current challenges that you're dealing with. But first, just to kind of recap and try and understand, how we got to where we are, to stimulate the economy during the onset of the pandemic. So if we go back to sort of March of 2020, we can see that the Bank of Canada lowered their interest rates, which is this green bar. And so they really lowered their interest rates basically to 0%, which is historically low. And this was to try and stimulate the economy, because at the time when we first locked down in March of 2020, there was a lot of economic anxiety. We literally locked down and shut down our economy. And so the Bank of Canada, the central bank of the country, was trying to support the system by making sure interest rates are as low as possible, which makes it cheap to borrow and facilitates some spending to continue to support the economy. And so this was kept at this very, very low rate for a couple years. It wasn't until, around early 2022 that interest rates started to increase. And so all of this period of time with very low rates, as I said, money was cheap. It was very cheap to borrow money. And so that actually helped to support asset prices. And we saw things like real estate prices really go crazy in 2021, especially. And other types of investments like stock markets, they were really doing well. And a lot of this is because of the sort of the cheap money that was out there, really increasing the value of assets. And so, we started to see all of this now trigger into inflation. Now, to be fair, it's not just that simple. It wasn't just that reason. It's a little bit more complicated than that. Yes, cheap financing was available that supported assets increasing, but we also, were trying to open up the economy again. And so all of this pent up consumer spending, was really waiting to spend money again. So we had all this pent up demand from individuals and from businesses that were, really unable to spend during those lockdown days. Then, of course, it's not so easy to just turn the economy back on again. We had supply chain problems, and that fed into inflation as well. Toss in a major war in Europe that disrupted global food and commodity prices like oil and gas, natural gas, oil. This was really sort of the perfect storm. All these different factors conflating and coming into effect all at the same time that really led to the explosion in inflation. And you can see that inflation reading here is the red line. And it's just kind of really started to kick off in 2021, and then it exploded into early 2022, where we topped up at 8.1% in June of 2022, which is the highest inflation reading that we've seen since you had to go back to January of 1983 to see an inflation reading that high. So now what does the Bank of Canada do? Because inflation that high is really, really bad for the economy. And so what they did was they increased interest rates to try and bring inflation down. And you can see this the green line, where the Bank of Canada rate was going up all through 2022. And so now where we sit is we have a Bank of Canada rate at about 5%. This is the highest Bank of Canada rate that we've seen in well over a decade. And it has relieved some of the inflation pressure. You can see inflation has come down somewhat, but it's still a little bit higher than what the Bank of Canada would like. The Bank of Canada tends to want inflation down around that 2% rate. And you can see right now we're somewhere in around 3% inflation. So that last little bit is probably going to be the hardest part for the Bank of Canada to reduce. Now, what does this impact of high interest rates do? Well, it makes borrowing costs more expensive. And the expectation then is when it's more expensive to borrow money, Canadians and businesses will pull back spending and will hope to bring inflation down. So that has somewhat worked, but we still have a way to go to get to where the Bank of Canada really wants inflation to be. Now, another way to think about this is in terms of your financial behaviors, right? Because by raising interest rates, the Bank of Canada is really trying to influence your financial behaviors. And they're hoping that people and businesses, as I said, will adjust their behaviors so that they are spending less to reduce inflation. Now, the risk, of course, is that overall spending does drop, but it drops significantly and has the potential of actually moving the economy into a recession where there could be job losses even. So this is where we're at today, and that we're in kind of a tricky, perilous position. And if you turn on the evening, economic news and you hear people talking about the potential for a recession, that's really what they're talking about, is this place that we're in where that last little bit of inflation going down is the trickiest part. And the Bank of Canada, is kind of caught in between a rock and a hard place. Should they increase interest rates and even more to try and bring that last little bit of inflation down? Well, the economy is in a perilous position. It might not be able to really handle any more interest rate increases without going into a serious recession. So this is a good time, I think, for us to talk about what we can do as individuals to shore up our resilience, given what's kind of happening in this perilous situation right now. And I think we want to talk about, the things you can control, which are your own behaviors, and where can you sort of promote an increase in earnings potentially, reduction in spending, and then looking at prioritizing, shifting your priorities, and that's that sacrificing behavior at the end. So let's start with your earnings. If your employment income rises, which would be a blessing, obviously. That's certainly what we're talking about, increasing your earning behaviors, just seeing your employment income rise. But the tendency then is to increase your lifestyle spending as well. So if you think more in normal times, you get more money, you tend to spend it. Maybe you upgrade your vehicle, make some changes to your home, take a vacation. So that's the sort of alluring tendencies to increase your lifestyle as you earn more income. Clearly now, if you're able to get a raise, earn some extra income, that money should be used to try and increase your resiliency, maybe increase your emergency fund savings or use it to pay down debt. So that's really what you want to be doing, is to try and get ahead financially. Is if you do get increase in your pay somehow or some way, make sure you're using that towards giving you some sort of buffer room to deal with the current economic challenges that we have. But now I think we want to talk about where can you actually find additional earnings. It's one thing if you just get a raise at work or an increase in your earnings from work, which is great, like we talked about, if you can. But where can you try to actively look for extra money? And one area to look for is, with your taxes. I think if you are, filing your income tax return and you actually get a tax refund this coming tax year, that's another opportunity, almost like you would treat like a bonus from work or an extra, like a raise from work. Use that extra money towards alleviating some of the things that are stressing you. Maybe that's debt, or maybe padding your emergency savings to help you weather the next sort of turbulent, 12 to 24 months. And we don't really know how long this will last. Interest rates can stay high like they are for longer than we anticipate. And so I think it's a good idea to try and build your emergency reserves at this period of time. So that's with a tax refund. But if you're a homeowner, this is, something that you might take a look at. I think when you get your property assessment from your municipality, we just kind of take it for granted that, oh, you know what, that's the number. And so your property taxes are derived from that. But I think you want to take a good look to make sure that, that's a fair assessment that they have on there. Because if you don't think it is, you can have, you do have mechanisms available to you to fight that and fight for what you think is a more fair assessment, especially if you think the property values on your assessment from the municipality are higher than what you think they are or should be at the moment, so that you can have that assessment reduced, which will have an effect on reducing your property taxes, saving you some money there. Then when you want to make sure that when you are filing your income tax return coming spring, tough to look towards the spring because we know we have cooler weather coming in the fall and then winter. So yes, we're going to look past that, all that misery of cold weather, and into next spring when you are going to be filing your income tax return. You certainly want to make sure that you're not leaving any eligible tax credits or tax deductions on the table. And I say this because, we know that every year certain tax credits are not used to the full extent that they can be. And it's probably just because of a lack of awareness. So it's a good reminder to make sure that you're using, tax software. If you're not usually using tax software, that's one of the advantages, because it will take all the information you're giving it. So your personal information, address, income, province of residence, marital status, dependents, and it will be able to, look at all the different tax credits and deductions and prompt you so that you don't leave anything off the table. If you want to work with a tax filer, professional tax filer, an accountant, um, for a little bit more money than what you would pay for software. But the benefit is that you will have that professional helping you, making sure you don't leave any money on the table. And this year, more than any, it might be a good idea to do that. Keep that in mind because we're going to come back to this at the end when we look at how the tax tables have changed this year and why this year is even more important to make sure that you don't leave any tax credits or deductions that you're eligible for, that you leave them unclaimed. And then, of course, other sources, assuming that your personal circumstances will allow, is there an opportunity for you to earn additional income outside of maybe your main occupation, outside of work? And so that's looking at if you have stuff accumulating in your house that you can sell, Facebook Marketplace, some of these other areas that you can turn to try and get a little bit of pocket money from any unused items that are in your place. And then maybe if you have a home with available space, that's another opportunity for you to try and get some extra money, maybe in the short-term rental market or even long-term rentals, just taking care of that underutilized space. So according to the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, there are over 12 million empty bedrooms in the country. So that's something to think about. You might be in that position if you have raised children and they're now independent, and you have the empty nesters we sometimes hear about. You may have some space in your home that you can actually rent out and make some money. You may have heard that we have a lot of international students coming into the country recently, and so that's potentially an opportunity there. Now, when it comes to looking at your spending behavior and looking for ways to maybe save some money there, as difficult as it is, given how lifestyle expenses have gone up, especially when we look at these big three. These are the three biggest areas that, on average, people are spending money. And lo and behold, these are probably the three biggest areas most impacted by inflation and the rising cost of living. So that's talking about food and groceries. Housing, when we're looking at rental prices in particular, have gone up. So if someone or you rent yourself, you're probably well aware of this. And then transportation costs, the cost of buying a new car, and then just the cost of putting gasoline in your vehicle. We're looking at historical increases in there as well. So I think it's a good idea to take a look at your overall spending, track it if you haven't done so in a while, just to see what your overall spending is, and in particular in those three big areas, but also on your more non-essential spending parts of your household expenditures, to see if you can find opportunities to cut expenses there. So, when was the last time you reviewed all your subscriptions that you have? Whether it's Netflix, streaming, music, movies, audiobooks, what have you. There may be some things there that you haven't used to the full extent that you are spending. So you could probably find opportunities there. And there's other low-hanging fruit, like trying to cook more at home if you're eating out a lot. We know people are pulling back on restaurants, especially here where I'm based out in the GTA. We know that over the last 3 months, restaurant spending has gone down. So you may already be doing this just as a survival mechanism because you've seen your cost of living go up so much. And so that's something that you can look at to help you pull back on some of your spending. Household, if you're running a household, clearly some of those tips, like using cold water more often with your laundry to reduce some of your household operating costs. As we're going into cooler months, eventually here in Southern Ontario, we're still in summer weather, but eventually those cooler months will come. Your heating costs might start to increase. And so trying to lower your temperature in your house, even if it's a 1 degree, to save some money. And then for more long-term investments, maybe looking at insulation on your walls. When's the last time you've reviewed that and maybe added some insulation there? Maybe even energy efficient windows. These things are more long-term and they require more of an upfront cost. But these are things that can help to sort of save a little bit of money over the next few months as we go into winter. So I think the idea is, and this is sort of a reminder, I think, is just take a look at your cash flow, the money you're spending and the money that's coming in. Now more than ever, you want to make sure that you're have a positive cash flow, that you're not in a cash flow deficit. And if you do have a cash flow surplus, that's great news. That means you have the opportunity now to take that surplus money to help you increase your resiliency towards the higher borrowing costs, higher interest rates that we're seeing. So maybe you're taking that extra money and you're focusing more on paying off debt. Certainly, I think that's a reasonable strategy if you have high interest debt in lines of credit or even a variable rate mortgage and you've seen your interest rates go up. That probably makes a lot of sense to focus on paying off debt. And so you might want to, take a look at the math there, comparing the interest rate savings. If you focus on paying debt versus focusing on increasing your savings or your investments. If you do have line of credit, variable rate mortgages, the math is probably going to say that you're better off focusing on paying off the debt because you've seen your interest rates go up to, 7, 8, 9% in some circumstances on lines of credit. They might even be higher, 11, 12, 13%. And so you're probably not going to get, or it's going to be harder for you to get that type of a rate of return on your savings. So the math suggests that it's better to pay off that debt. But if your debt is low or your interest is fixed at current rates, we're going to talk about mortgage renewals coming up. But if your debt is low and you're not too concerned about debt, then by all means, take that opportunity to focus on increasing your savings, especially if you have short-term savings that you're looking to do, because higher interest rates means it's more expensive to borrow money, but you're also getting higher interest on your short-term savings in particular. So let me just jump in here to this is a really good website, ratehub.ca, because it aggregates interest rates that you can compare. And so when we're looking at savings rates in savings products like a GIC that you can get at the bank. So here's an example of how short-term savings in a high interest savings account or a GIC have been impacted by higher rates. Is that if you're looking at short-term deposits, even for just 1 year, you're looking at interest rates around 5 or higher. And so that's pretty good. We haven't seen short-term savings rates at these levels for a very, very long time. You have to go well over a decade. So that's, additional incentive for people who want to focus on saving money right now, especially in short-term areas, is that you're actually going to see a really nice rate on those short-term savings products like GICs. But if you do have debt and you've seen your borrowing costs increase, we want to talk about what you can do to sort of alleviate some of that debt stress, some of that debt management that you're dealing with. And the first thing I think is, I think some people forget that you can negotiate options with your lender, with the institutions that you're borrowing money from. Is that you can contact them to find out what your options are. And you might be having discussions with them around, if it's a credit card that you have that you're worried about maintaining payments or paying it down, see if you can switch to a lower interest rate card. And that will help it lower the interest and allow you to pay that down faster. With all your other different types of debt arrangements, you can negotiate some sort of deferral of payment, kind of giving you a payment holiday. You'll have to make those payments up down the road so they don't disappear, but you can kind of give yourself a little bit of breathing room in the interim. What can you do in terms of negotiating different payment arrangements so that you can give yourself a little bit of relief in terms of payments? Maybe making a little bit of smaller payments now to give yourself a little bit of relief. And then can you renegotiate your debts at all to find a way to lower the payments? That might mean extending the remaining term that you have on that debt further. So your overall interest payments will be higher in total because you're going to be taking longer to pay this thing off than you originally planned, but you're going to give yourself a little bit of relief now with lower payments, especially when it comes to mortgages and mortgage renewals, which we're going to save a little special discussion to talk about mortgage renewals. If you ever get any offers to lower your rates, lower your borrowing costs, I think it makes sense to take advantage of them. So here's an example of one that I actually got last year. It came in the mail, which was a pre-approved visa from another financial institution. And the offer here was that if I signed up for this, they were going to give me a low introductory rate. So it's not a permanent rate. It's only for a short period of time. In this case, I think it was 6 months. But the rate was going to be 0% on any balance transfers. So if you are sitting here and you are carrying debt on a credit card or a line of credit, and you get an offer like this, or you can actually seek out an offer like this, talk to your bank to see. Oftentimes you'll see this show up on your online banking, or if you get something in the mail, but you can actually just call your bank to see what they might have in terms of any low rate promotional offers for signing up for a new credit card or a line of credit, which the idea here is not to have a new credit card that you use to spend. It's to use the low rate offer that they're giving you for balance transfers so that you can transfer your balance from another facility that you've seen the interest rates go up or that you're struggling paying. You can transfer it on to this new facility and take advantage of that low rate balance transfer promotion. It could be 6 months, it could be a year, where you have 0% interest rate from transferring the balance from another card. So once you've transferred that balance from that other debt facility and you now have 0% interest, you can continue to make your payments. You certainly want to continue making minimum payments on this one, but on the facility that you transfer the balance from, if you still have a balance there remaining, remember, you're still paying that higher rate on the other facility that you transferred the balance from. Make your payments and make extra payments there because you're giving yourself a little bit of relief. You've moved some of that debt off to something that has 0% interest. And so that's your opportunity with a lower balance left on that higher rate product. Try and pay that down as fast as possible so that when this promotional period ends and you transfer the balance back onto your other card, there's less overall there because you've taken that window of time to try and make some headway on paying down that balance. So yeah, opportunities like that, if you see them, I think it makes sense to take advantage of them because it's just going to give you that overall interest rate relief on your debts. Let's talk about mortgages. In this country, we typically have, two dominant types of mortgages. We have fixed rates or variable rates. There are a few people that have sort of these hybrid mortgage products that are offered out there. They're hybrid in a way that they have a fixed rate mortgage, but then they also attach to it a line of credit. Whereas you pay down your mortgage, you build up the limit on the line of credit. And so I want to focus mostly on these fixed and variable rates because usually, stereotypically, most people are in fixed rate mortgages, but for the majority of 2021 and into the early part of 2022, remember at the beginning of our session when I showed you the interest rate chart where the Bank of Canada lowered interest rates to essentially 0% for 2 years during the pandemic. Well, that 0% was very, very alluring for new mortgages in that most people took advantage of that and went into variable rate mortgages during that period of time. And so here's what we're looking at now when we are trying to compare fixed and variable rates. Historically, variable rates are cheaper in terms of the interest rate and the borrowing costs. And the reason they're cheaper is because you, the borrower, are taking on the risk of seeing your payments and your interest fluctuate as interest rates go up and down. Whereas if you go with a fixed rate mortgage, your interest and your payments are locked in for the term. And so as interest rates in the background go up and down, that doesn't impact you at all until your renewal comes up, and then you have to renew at the current rate at that time. So the variable rate borrower is taking on that risk of seeing their interest rates fluctuate during their term. The fixed rate borrower doesn't have to deal with that until their term comes up for renewal. So as a result of the variable rate mortgage holder taking on that risk, the banks and the financial institutions usually pass on a lower rate of borrowing to them. And I say usually. And in some periods of time, that spread of lower variable rates compared to the fixed rates is really gigantic. So 2010, and then back to what we saw when the Bank of Canada lowered interest rates to around 0%, you can see that spread was pretty significant. And this is why it was very alluring for a lot of people to pile into variable rate mortgages during those 2 years because of that spread. You can see you can get a variable rate mortgage at around 1%. The problem is what happened in 2022 as interest rates started to increase. And it's these individuals holding a variable rate that have seen and have experienced the major brunt of the early increase in interest rates. Now, here's where we're at in that we actually see variable rates are higher than fixed rates, which is unusual, right? If you go back and you see, usually the fixed rates are higher, but variable rates have increased because of the rate of increase in interest rates. That has really seen variable rates skyrocket. But we're actually seeing fixed rates, especially now, starting to increase significantly, and this gap is closing yet again. So what to do if you are sitting here at renewal time? Do you go with another variable rate mortgage, or do you go fixed? And this is a very tricky call to make, but I think the call is still around assessing your tolerance for risk. Because if you're looking at going into a variable rate mortgage, it's potentially risky. The bet you're probably making is that interest rates are going to, they can't go up much higher than where they are, and that eventually they'll start to go down, hopefully maybe in the next year or two. But that's a very risky proposition because even if they don't go up, they may stay at these elevated levels much longer than you think. But then you might be looking at fixed rates, and fixed rates are also going up as well. Now, fixed rates move up and down based on the bond market. Specifically, we're looking at the Canadian government bonds. That 5-year Canadian government bond is what drives the changes in fixed rates. And so that can fluctuate going up and down. Right now, it's increasing seemingly every day. And we're seeing fixed rates go up and up and up. And it does make it tricky when you are looking at your mortgage renewal in looking at how, variable rates are high and fixed rates seemingly are now approaching that same level of variable rates. So how do you handle your mortgage renewal? First of all, we have to acknowledge how many people are dealing with our upcoming renewal in the next couple of years. When you look at all the household homeowners in the country, it's only about half of them that actually have a mortgage. So, if you're a homeowner and you don't have a mortgage, you're not really impacted by this upcoming renewal difficult decision that people have to make. Out of the people that do have a mortgage, most of these people have their mortgage coming up for renewal over the next couple of years. So 2024, 2025, and 2026. And even if your mortgage has been fixed, let's say over the last 5 years at a low rate, say 2%, you are now looking at a mortgage renewal at a much higher rate, which means your interest and your payments are looking to have a significant jump. And it's this jump that you might be worried about, and you might think you might not be able to afford. So first of all, you're going to have to, make sure that you're having a discussion with your lenders around what your options are. A lot of the lenders are going to be looking at what they can do to help you lower your payments by extending your amortization. And so this is what we're looking at in this example here. What does that look like if you extend your amortization? So if your interest rate was low and now even though you've paid some of your balance off, but you're looking at renewing at a higher rate, that might mean a significant jump in your payments. So if you can have this happen where you are extending the amortization, maybe even back to its original 25 years, for example, this has a way of, yes, your payments are still going up, but they're going up at a lower amount than they otherwise would if you weren't looking at this sort of extending of your amortization. So this is probably what your lenders and your financial institutions are going to be discussing with you as one of your major options to help you manage the increase in your payments. And it can reduce the increase. You're still looking at an increase, but it's probably going to be a little bit lower, maybe one that's a little bit more manageable. And it's going to give you extra time to repay the loan by extending back to the original amortization. So if you've been making, your payments on time throughout your term, then you should be eligible for this. So if you had any late payments at some point during your term, you might not be eligible for this. And so to extend your amortization back to its original term during the contract period, that's what we're looking at. But if you want to extend it above its original term, so even extend beyond 25 years, it's going to be a little bit more complicated. You might have to requalify, which might mean a new credit check as well. And then there may be an appraisal. So there might be additional fees that you have to look at. So I think fairly simple to look at extending it back to your original amortization. And then the other thing you want to do is shop around during your mortgage renewal. I think you want to be making sure that you are looking at what other lenders and what other institutions are offering. Because even if they're going to be giving you a lower rate by even just, let's say, 0.25% lower than what your bank that you currently are working with or your mortgage lender that you currently have right now is offering you, that's going to make a big impact on your payments. So never forget that during your mortgage renewal, that's an opportunity for you to shop around. And if it means moving to a new institution, a new lender to take their lower rates, you might be very well, it might make sense to do that. The only drawback there is that oftentimes you have to requalify. And when we requalify, we have to remember those mortgage stress tests, which means you have to qualify at a higher rate than the rate you're actually going to be making your payments on. So the posted rate for qualifying is oftentimes 2% higher. And so that could mean you're looking at qualifying at posted rates now. If we look at what a 5-year fixed rate mortgage is at right now, you might be qualifying at somewhere around close to 8% in your renewal. So if you can qualify at that level, then it might make sense for you to shop around and jump on a lower rate that's being offered by another financial institution. All right, so yeah, clearly higher borrowing costs means, the impact on your debts, your mortgages, your lines of credit, your credit cards. You might want to be focusing on whatever you can do to save on your interest borrowing costs on your debts. But let's not also forget that your savings, if you can continue to maintain and continue to have the discipline on continuing to save, or at least avoid drawing down from your savings to, give yourself relief on your debts. And if you have to do that, you have to do that. But if you can continue to maintain your investments and continue to save, you should try to do that if you can. And this is a reminder that, yes, your asset mix on your investments is an important thing to review. You want to go ahead and review that now. Even though we've seen some turbulence in investing markets, this is a good time to review to make sure that the strategic asset mix you have in place still continues to make sense. And so that's the decision around, how much of your portfolio is in equities, how much of your portfolio is in stock, how much of your portfolio is in fixed income, cash, and all these other types of assets. And so review that with your financial planners at your financial institutions to make sure that it continues to make sense. As you get closer to retirement, you might want to review it to see if you should start to become more conservative in your portfolio because you have less time to make up for any losses in your investments. And so that's the type of review you want to be doing. Now, if you still have time ahead of you before, let's say, for retirement, you want to make sure that you're not um, using the current turbulence in the economy and reacting to it by um, moving too far away from your strategic asset mix that you've set up. In that, the temptation is, you've seen the economy wobble, you've seen investment markets, especially in 2022. 2022 was a down year all across different types of investment assets. Whether you were investing in Canadian equities, US equities, global equities, or even in the bonds that are in the fixed income that are supposed to be more safe, 2022, all of it went down. It was a down year for everything, even the fixed income and the bonds that typically don't go down that often. But it turns out when interest rates are flying up as quickly as they were in 2022, that's negative for bonds and their investment expectations. So that was a down year for bonds and fixed income as well. So there really was nowhere to hide in 2022. And this is a reminder that when we're looking at a short time horizon, like for example, let's just look at a 1 year period of time. There is the potential for volatility where you can have very good performance, but you can also have very poor performance. In 2022, we were more on the very poor performance part of it. But this is a reminder that if you go back and look at your strategic asset mix and you confirm that, yes, I should stick it out and recover over time, the recovery will happen, right? So if you hold it long enough, 15 years of a time horizon, even at the sort of lowest percentile of investment performance, is still on the positive end. And that's because, the compounding of your investment earnings over time really shrinks the volatility and the risk in your portfolio. So if you have time ahead of you, you still want to make sure that you're maintaining your asset mix and that you're not panicking and moving too quickly towards what you think are more safer assets. Because you really do need the long-term growth from your portfolio to at least keep up with inflation over the long term. I know that we looked at a chart when we looked at GICs at 5%, and so that's essentially what low risk assets are providing you right now, 5%, which is good. I think it's a great place to park your money for short term. So if you need to park your money for the short term, let's say you're looking to get into the housing market next year. Well, you shouldn't be investing in stocks. You need to put it in something safe where the money's going to be there when you need it. Same thing with your emergency funds. You might have a travel fund, or you're just looking to park some cash for the short term for some other use, some other need. Then yes, it makes sense to go ahead and look at those GICs, those high interest savings accounts that are paying 5%. But if you're looking at long-term investing, putting it in something like that, like a GIC at 5%, it's still going to be hard for you to keep up with inflation, because when your GIC and your high interest savings account, and when interest rates starts to go down again, you're going to see your rate go down, and they may not be able to keep up with inflation over the long term. That's when you're going to be kicking yourself from moving out of your more growth-oriented investments like equities and stocks that have a historical record of better keeping up with inflation. Now, this is, switching gears a little bit, looking at tax planning. We were talking about tax planning earlier. And this is a reminder that our tax brackets are adjusted every year based on inflation. And so in 2022, when you filed your income taxes, this was our tax brackets. And in this example, I'm using Ontario. And so if you're joining us from another province, this is going to be slightly different for you. I'm blending Ontario, the provincial, and the federal income tax brackets here. And you can see that from 2022 to 2023, there's a significant jump in our tax brackets, such that the 15% marginal rate went from $50,000 of income at the very top end to now we're at $53,000 of income at the top end. And each of these tax brackets, so if we look at the 20.5% marginal tax rate, went from $100,000 at the top end to $106,000. So remember that we have a progressive tax system in this country, and that we pay taxes at a different rate as our income increases and goes up into higher and higher tax brackets. And so in this tax bracket here, you're paying income tax at this rate. And then when your income exceeds that into this next bracket, you're paying just for that chunk a higher rate. And so on and so forth for any high income earners there. So what's happening here is that every year the tax brackets go up to keep up with inflation, such that this year for 2023, you can use for some tax planning. Number one, it's just nice to know that you have an extra $3,000 of income that you can earn before you're bumped up from that 15% rate. It allows you to take extra advantage of any tax deductions or tax credits that you had. Remember what I was saying earlier. Those tax deductions and credits reduce your tax so that you can even take even further advantage of the extra room you have before you bump up into higher rates. Use those deductions and credits to further lower your taxes before any higher rates kick in. And then if you have property that you're selling, let's say a cottage that is in the family, was passed down to you, and you're going to sell it this year. Great. This is the year you want to do that because you're going to have extra room before you're kicked up into higher income brackets. And so you could sell that property this year, and it might not bump you up into that higher room, depending on, of course, what your profit are on that property. So this is the year you definitely want to take advantage of any tax planning opportunities, especially making sure you don't leave any tax deductions or tax credits on the table. All right, so speaking of taxes, we have a brand new savings account provided to us by the government. Anybody on the call who is looking forward or trying to get into the housing market, I know we've been talking about the challenges of dealing with your mortgage coming up for renewal, but if you are trying to get into the housing market, maybe over the next few years, you have another tool in your toolbox, because in April of 2023, the first home savings account was introduced as a new savings account in this country that allows you, if you're eligible, to open up this account at your financial institution. And so to be eligible, you have to qualify as a first-time home buyer, which means you haven't owned a home, or you're not living together with your spouse in a home that you or your spouse owns this year that you're opening the account, or in the 4 years going backwards from this year. And so that's how to qualify as an eligible first-time home buyer. Then you can actually open this account. Once you've opened this account, you can actually start to put money in, and you can put up to $8,000 a year into this account until you hit the lifetime limit of $40,000. So $40,000 is the limit in total of what you can put into this account, but you can only put in $8,000 a year. Now, if you don't use up all of your annual room, let's say you put $5,000 instead of $8,000, that extra $3,000 could carry over to next year as well. What happens with the money you put in? Well, you get an immediate tax deduction. So talking about tax deductions in the previous slide, putting any money into this account, same as an RSP, right? When you put money in, you get an immediate tax deduction, which reduces your taxable income. And this year, that's going to be even more advantageous to do that because of how much the tax brackets have gone up, thinking about the previous slide that we just looked at. Once you put your money into this account, you can invest it however you like. You have the same investment options that you do inside of an RSP. But the thing that's different about this account is that you take the money out to pay your down payment for your home purchase. And as long as you're doing that, then when you take the money out, it's tax free. All right, tax free. And so to have an account, as I mentioned, you have to be a Canadian resident, you have to be 18 and over, and you have to qualify as a first-time home buyer, which means you and your spouse, or I should say, you have not lived in a home that you or your spouse owns during the year that you're opening the account or any of the previous 4 calendar years. And once you open the account, you can start using it. You can start putting money in. You have that account can stay open up to 15 years. So you have 15 years to save and then take the money out to buy your first home. If you're using it to buy a home, that money can go out tax free. If you're taking the money out and it's not to buy a home, then you will have to pay taxes on that money as it comes out. But if you end up not buying the home, instead of taking the money out and paying taxes, you can just roll that money into your RSP, and there's no tax consequences on that transfer. It's just a transfer from this account into your RSP. Eventually, you'll take money out of your RSP at retirement time and pay taxes then. All right. Finally, let's look at some support that's available from government programs, other resources available to you, and also to your household. Now, there's very limited support coming from governments because, of course, if we go back to COVID and remember the extraordinary support we had from the government at that time, well, if they tried to do something like that now, it would be very inflationary. In fact, it would be counterproductive because it would keep inflation high. In fact, it might start going up again. And so that's why we're seeing, I think, more targeted things that might not necessarily impact you, but it can impact other members of your household, particularly with this example. If you have university age students in your home, they announced that they were eliminating the interest on the federal portion of student loans. So usually student loans have a portion of it that are federal and a portion of it that are provincial. So the provincial portion, you're still going to have to pay interest depending on the province of residence. But the federal portion of your Canada student loans, you now have the ability of making interest-free payments indefinitely now. And so that's some good news if you have university age students or recent young adults working that still are paying off their student loans. The other thing to remember is that some of our benefits get automatically adjusted for inflation. So if you have children and you're getting the Canada Child Benefit, that payment automatically gets adjusted every year higher based on how much inflation we've experienced. And so the payment schedule in 2023 runs from July of 2023 to June of 2024. The new payments were calculated higher based on the high levels of inflation we saw in 2022. Same thing if you have any parents or seniors in your life, grandparents or parents that are retired and are collecting government retirement benefits like Canada Pension Plan and Old Age Security. Those benefits get automatically adjusted to keep up with inflation as well. The Guaranteed Income Supplement is a low income seniors benefit. So any seniors that are low income get this additional benefit on top of their CPP and their OAS. And then, so we looked at the new savings account with the more traditional savings accounts we have, like the tax-free savings account and the RSP. Those contribution limits also went up based on how much inflation we had last year. So the new TFSA limit in 2023 is $6,500, and it's looking like it might go up again on January of 2024 to about $7,000. So we'll look out for confirmation when the government announces, but the expectation is that it's going to go up again. And then RSPs this year have now gone up to $30,780. Now it's based on your earnings. Your RSP room is calculated based on your earnings, but there's an annual ceiling, and that ceiling this year has gone up to about $30,780. So wrapping up, and then we'll take a look at any questions that we have. To fortify your cash flow, take a look at what you're spending is at the moment. See if you have any opportunities to reduce any non-essential expenses. And then, to the degree that you have the opportunity to take some decisions around prioritizing, maybe focusing on debt or focusing on savings, that's going to depend on your level of debt and how much borrowing costs have gone up for you. For many people, it's going to make sense to focus on debt, but you might be in a position also to continue to save as well. With your borrowing costs higher, look for opportunities to reduce those borrowing costs. So if you have an opportunity or promotion to use a balance transfer at 0% or a very, very low rate, if you are carrying other debt on higher interest products, that might be attractive to take advantage of. And then certainly as you're coming up for renewal with your mortgages, this is when you want to be talking to your lender well ahead of time. So you might be getting a letter of a 6-month renewal offer. So actually what I mean is 6 months before your renewal date, you might be getting offer letters from your lending institutions. And if they're coming to you now, you might want to take advantage and jump on those, because we're only seeing interest rates, especially fixed rates, going up recently because of the increase in 5-year Canadian government bonds going up, and that impacts fixed rate mortgages. So you certainly, I think, want to start early, looking at your renewal options, talking to your lender, and having discussions with them about what it might look like to extend your amortization to reduce your payments and give you some relief there. If you can stay disciplined with your savings, that's obviously a good idea to do so. But this is a good opportunity to review your portfolios as well, to make sure that they still continue to make sense. Your strategy on your investments continue to make sense. And that if you are getting closer to retirement, you should look to see, should you start now to have a more conservative mix in your portfolios as you get ready for retirement income. So it's about making the necessary adjustments there. And then with tax planning, again, this year more than ever, you want to make sure that you don't leave any tax credits, tax deductions on the table, especially because of the higher inflation-based adjustments to our tax brackets. This is the year for sure that you want to make sure that you're taking full advantage of all the eligible tax credits and tax deductions that you have. And so that's about it in terms of the content that we wanted to talk about today. Question in the chat: what if you have US dollar loans? What would be a better way of paying down that loan while saving money if you are only earning Canadian dollars, especially with interest rates going up and down? Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer, because on top of the point you made about the interest rates and the movement, when you're talking about another currency, you also have to gauge the exchange rate, and that also moves on a daily basis, up and down as well. And so it does make it tricky to look at what makes sense for any US dollar loans, because paying off US dollar loans, you're going to be using US dollars to pay those things off. And so that means looking at sort of the impact on the exchange rate as well. Sometimes what without knowing more about your personal circumstances, so I really don't want to give you any specific advice, but generally, one way I look at moving Canadian to US dollars around is just having a set schedule every period of time, a set schedule where you move some of your Canadian dollars into US dollars, so that you're not paralyzed by that decision of when should I move all this chunk of money to take advantage of the exchange rate. If you just set a set schedule where you move a little bit every period of time, considering, of course, there are transaction costs on that, you do have to pay fees every time you are converting money. So, how frequently should you be doing this? Maybe not every day, maybe not every week, but maybe once a month or every few months. You set a schedule where you move some money from your Canadian dollar account to your US dollar account, and then you just are not paralyzed by trying to maximize that exchange rate decision. And then inertia might kick in and you don't end up doing anything. You just set a set schedule for yourself where you move some dollars around. And so that might be a more easier way for you to do this. And then once you have enough money into your US dollar account, you can use it to start paying off your US dollar loans, because this is not just a Canadian story, it's a US story, it's a global story where we've seen interest rates and inflation go up. So hopefully that helps you there. Thanks for that question.